In order to do our homework today about the 3 different kinds of rocks, we are going to look at what it says in our book on lesson 4. There are 3 classes of rocks. So, first of all, how are we going to classify them? How are we going to sort them? There are 2 ways, by their mineral composition and by their texture. When they say mineral composition, they're talking about what is in it. Compositions, what is it made of? You might remember that the minerals feldspar, hornblende, and quartz go together to make this rock, which is granite. So that is the composition. Those are the ingredients to make this rock. So we learned about minerals. Those were all ingredients. Now we are talking about the rocks that are made out of those minerals. Also, by their texture, rocks do not all feel the same. Some of them have big crystals in them. Some of them are kind of chunky and dusty. Some of them feel smooth. Some of them feel sandy. And so we've got a lot of different rocks here that we are going to learn a little bit about how to identify. And we will start out with the same one that they start out with in your book. We're going to start with the igneous rocks. That's the same one they start with on our worksheet as well. 2 different kinds of igneous rocks. So igneous rocks, igneous, ignited. I see the word, the base word ignite in there. That means they have been on fire. So they are either intrusive or extrusive. Think of the words inside and exit. They either formed inside the earth or they have exited the earth and formed on the surface. So if they were way down underneath of the earth where there is magma, we know that if we dig a deep, deep hole, we will not get to China, as I thought when I was a child. We will eventually hit magma if we could dig that deep. And so that magma underneath there is really hot. And as it cools down on these outside edges, or if it goes up this little crack and then this part cools down, it starts to crystallize. And so it makes things like this diorite and like that granite that we were looking at there. So let's come over here and take a look at that. Here we have some granite. It can be oranges, pinks, blacks, whites, and over here we have some diorite. A little collection of these different igneous rocks. A lot of them are very crystally. And there are 2 other words that old-fashioned books will use. They will say plutonic and volcanic. All of these are igneous rocks. But by plutonic, they mean those are intrusive underneath of the earth. And by volcanic, they mean that they are extrusive. They have come out of the earth. So you've seen these before. This is the lava rock, the obsidian. That is a black glass. I have a piece here. This piece is not as shiny, but where it breaks, you can see that it is. There is also some pumice and scoria. It comes in a couple of different colors. You can buy this at the Dollar General store, so you can use that on the rough patches on your knees and elbows and on your feet. So you can buy volcanic rock to use at home. You might remember that you have lifted up this one that at the rock store they called feather rock. Those are really, really big rock, and you guys thought it would be really heavy, but it's not. If we look close, it is pumice. It is filled with tiny, tiny air bubbles, and it has tiny, tiny little sharp edges on it because it is a volcanic glass. So this lava cooled down relatively slowly, not as slowly as these. These took millions of years. That's why they crystallized. These would cool down a little bit faster, but it does get a glassy look to it. But this got a little foamy and bubbly, and it was on the top surface, and it cooled down pretty quickly. And that's what happened with that piece of pumice over there as well. You can see, if you kind of look, you can see some lines where lava rolled in, and then more lava rolled in, and then more lava rolled in. And as we touch it, where those bubbles have broke, it is kind of sharp. So you might remember doing that in class. So those are your igneous rocks, made by volcanoes and magma. The next rock they talk about on our paper is sedimentary rocks, and that is also the next rocks they talk about in our book. We see the base word sediment in sedimentary rocks. So that is when, usually in water, things have settled to the bottom and mud and clay and things that fall to the bottom harden together. Usually that forms clastic sedimentary rocks. Now, it's not super important that you can tell clastic from chemical from organic sedimentary rocks right now, but it's a nice to know, not a need to know bit of information that will help you later if you take more geology classes. So classic sedimentary rocks, basically that got buried and compacted all together. So we see things like this sandstone, and you can see that there were lots of layers of sand that compacted together and got squished until they are a rock. And here is another one over here. This one is Breccia, and it almost looks like a piece of concrete. There are lots of little rocks that got all stuck together. If you take a look at these mountains out west, you can see that sandstone like this. You can see where it was laid down in layers. That was sand, and then it hardened and compacted together. And then erosion and weathering wore the rock away so that we could see the exposed edges. Chemical sedimentary rocks are rocks that have crystallized. So usually seawater or some other water that has a lot of minerals in it that have dissolved. When it evaporates, what is left behind is salt like this. What you see here are salt flats that are out in Utah. There was a great big salty lake there, and when it evaporated, what was left behind were these. But we also see selenite. It's not just salt that does that. There are other minerals that will crystallize when the water evaporates, kind of like the borax crystals that some of you made. Another type is the organic sedimentary rocks. Now, these are kind of my favorite because they have a lot of fossils in them. The word organic means that it was once living, so once living plants or animals. Most limestone, and this is what we see out in our driveways. So for a lot of kids, this is where they start to get excited about rocks and minerals. They go right outside on their driveway and they find some fossils, and that's what sparks their interest. So we'll talk about some fossils. There is one called coquina, which is just basically a whole bunch of shells all stuck together. They haven't fossilized, but just stuck together. And coal is actually an organic sedimentary rock because it used to be alive. This used to be plants, not dinosaurs, but plants. And then over the years, it turned into coal. I have quite a collection of really cool sedimentary rocks here. They are my favorite. You can see that most of them look like dirt and mud and sand that has hardened together, but sometimes we get some really cool fossils. So first, let's look at the sandstone. It can come in a lot of different colors. So we've got whites, oranges, browns, even blacks. You can see the layers where it all settled together. Those are tiny little grains of sand that got cemented together until they formed a sandstone. Now this one in particular, if we were in class, you would get to take another harder rock and rub on here until you can get little grains of sand to come off of it. And you would see that right here is a layer of something that was a little bit harder with some iron in it. And that part does not wear away as well. I wish you got to do that activity. These are some conglomerates where rocks have just all stuck together. You might think that is a piece of concrete or asphalt, and sometimes they are, but sometimes that is naturally occurring. Those really did. This has a lot of jasper in it, so that's a pretty cool one. I have tons of fossils because I love fossils. This one's probably my favorite one. In West Virginia, I found this. This is the fossil of a tree root. You might remember seeing that in the back of our room in the glass cabinet. I was in West Virginia hiking along with some friends when I found that. This is a tropical tree, and we would have had those here in Ohio. The stem of this tree looks a little more like X's, and this looks a little more like polka dots. But here's something that you might find right here in Morrow County. You might find some of these, lots of different kinds of fossilized snails. Here's something called horn coral. This is the first big fossil that I found in our field in Morrow County, and it does look like a cow horn, but that would have been a coral. There would have been a little living animal sitting right in there. Here's one that has broken in half, another little horn coral. Here's one that my science teacher from when I was in junior high gave to me that has a horn coral, and it has some other corals on it as well. This is one that Miss Kaufman found at a stone quarry. This is called a beef heart clam. As you can see, here's the crack of it. So there's the clam shell has that little opening, and they thought that it looked like a beef heart. This one is a slab of like the whole hardened seafloor. This one came from Dayton, and you see lots of little corals, and then we see right here some little stems of, totally just lost the word for those. They look like fossilized earthworms, and you might find those you definitely will find them in Ohio. You might find some in Morrow County, but we find a lot more of the brachiopods, like clam likes, and the horn corals. This is a piece of hardened mud, and everywhere you see those little divots, that's where there would have been some kind of little clam stuck in there. Here's a little fossilized piece of the of the ocean floor. I don't know where that came from. Of the ocean floor from when Ohio was covered up by oceans, and you can see where little worms and things have crawled around in the mud and it hardened. I like this great big piece of limestone that came out of a stone quarry up by Lake Erie, because you can see how the mud settled in, and there's a lot of lime and calcium in this rock, because this would have been when there was an ancient ocean here, and all of those seashells were made out of calcium and lime, and as they died and decayed in the water, there was a lot of calcium and lime left behind. And you can see different years, different things, washed in there. This layer right here had a lot of air pockets and bubbles to it, so I don't know if you can tell really well, but here's some little purple fluorite crystals that formed there. And in that same area, in that same layer, I hit this with the hammer, and it had an opening in the middle. This would have been a sea sponge. There's half of it, and there's the other half of it. So that hollow area then filled in with crystals. So all of those crystals, like the salt and the calcite, those are sedimentary rocks because they were in the water and they settled out. I really enjoy looking for fossils. This one came from North Carolina, so we don't find those in Ohio very often, but it's possible. But many of you have some cool fossils that you have brought in as well.